joining us. We're going to do this as a fireside chat, so feel free to pop your questions into the chat as we're going through on the left-hand side there. We do have someone monitoring the chat, and they'll let us know as questions do pop up. My name is Tracy Capshay. I am one of the team leads for the customer success team, and really just looking forward to our fireside chat today. Now, most importantly, just wanted to introduce our guests. They're no strangers to the implementation of these projects. So I would like to introduce to you Michael Steinman and Sebastian Hoff. Michael, would you like to go first in your introduction?
Sure. My name is Michael Steinman, as Tracy said. I work with Modus Associates, and I've been doing intranet migrations for probably, I sadly said, for close to 20 years. So I've done them across a wide variety of verticals, from insurance to healthcare to media conglomerates to real estate. And as we were joking in the pre-call to this is something that I get very excited about, because when it goes well, an internet migration can really make or break the rollout of a new intranet. And when it goes poorly, it's really your own fault because you didn't plan well. And so I think, hopefully today we can talk about some of the do's and don'ts and some of the things to look out for, for those on the call today who might be either thinking about or getting ready to go for it. So looking forward to the discussion today.
All right, and for those of you who haven't seen me already in the previous session, my name is Sebastian Hoff, working for Staffbase within the strategic advisory team. And before joining Staffbase, migrations were a huge part of my whole professional career, not only intranet migrations, but also websites, CRMs. So I have seen quite some different migrations and learned a lot on any of those. And I'm now bringing this into the consultations of our customers who are usually also facing migrations if they are deciding to go with a Staffbase intranet.
Wonderful. No shortage of years of experience from both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited to have you both here. So the keys have been handed over. Our project plan is completed. We're trading in our clunky old car or clunky old intranet, and now we get to migrate our content over. And I'm sitting down and I'm tasked with the thought of doing that. And we want to make sure that that new intranet shines the way that it should. So I'm curious from both of you, what should I do to get started? What would be my first step in taking that plunge into migrating that content?
Sure. So I'll jump in. I think the first step, which is often missed, is really understanding what content exists on the old intranet. Usually, when we've done this and we've partnered with people, you ask anyone from the different groups in the organization, and they all have a different view of what lives on that intranet, depending on how old it was. In the last session we talked about, is it a wiki? Is it a file share? And you sort of start to uncover this. And as you go through, one of the key things is to do a really good audit. And hopefully you can use a tool. You can sort of crawl it and understand it. If not, have someone come in and actually map it out. Because what you'll start to see is some patterns that emerge, right? You'll have, N number of the same types of articles. So it's a monthly newsletter or it's a quarterly report, and you'll have 10,000 monthly newsletters or whatever it is, depending on how long the piece is. So, I think the first place to start is really to get that superset, that list. And then from there, you have to kind of determine who is going to be responsible for sort of the keep, kill, edit breakdown, right? Some of the stuff, it's a great time, the migrations often serve as like a spring cleaning, right? There's a lot of outdated corporate information, which from like an HR compliance perspective, you want to get rid of it. You want to sort of permanently bury that and get rid of it. But there's also a lot of stuff that really, maybe gets used a lot. So, that keep, kill, edit discussion, we also recommend, maybe looking at your analytics. And if you don't have analytics on your old intranet, now is a good time to turn it on to see what people are actually using. Sebastian, you want to add to that?
I can absolutely agree. So that would have been my answer right from the spot. So taking the analytics, having this analysis phase to see what is there, what do we want to take over, and maybe also going into the direction of setting up some simple rules how the migration will go. So it could be something very strict where we say, okay, we are taking over a maximum of 10% of our content. It's something I have seen happening. It could be that we're saying, okay, we are looking at the analytics and we're deciding everything which hasn't had over 100 views over the last months will just be deleted. There could be exceptions. So if you have medical services for addicted people inside of the company, you probably will keep this page, even though luckily that has very, very few visits. But to have those kind of rules and guidelines helps also to explain content owners, why are we doing this migration the way we are doing this, and why do you have to throw your beloved content away?
Yeah. And I think the other piece to add, which is often overlooked, is it's not just looking at content for content's sake. A lot of times you need to analyze, like, does this have a new home in the new intranet? And that could be a real reason for, like, oh, well, this has important information, but it needs to be broken up into 3 different pieces because the structure and the design that's coming out of the new intranet, is really changing how we're communicating. Whether that's an internal reorg, by divisions or by product or by business unit or location. Sometimes you have to say, hey, well, we need to keep this, but it has to be repackaged. Or, we need to keep this, but actually we need 10 more versions of it because, we're operating in multiple countries now, or we have different jurisdictions that we have to handle. So it gets a little bit more complicated. The first pass is always good of like, oh, we definitely need this. And then there's that second pass where you start to say, well, can this be repurposed? The other one that I always love that, when I'm working with clients that they're surprised at, they're like, well, we have all these PDFs. We're like, well, one of the reasons we're making you a new intranet is so that it's all searchable and it's not in PDF. So yes, you have the content, but now we have to start to think about how are we going to structure that? What are the pieces that need to get pulled out? And, starting to think about that business process as well, as to how it's going to get into the new format that we want to get it in as sort of the target.
Yeah, and Michael, do you have seen that migrations also over the last couple of years have changed in the way that they are done? Because if I'm remembering back to the first, especially internet migrations that I have conducted, there were many things automated. So we had a lot of automated migration topics. So we took over news, press releases, and so on an automated basis. I have the feeling that there is a kind of mind shift in a lot of companies as they say, okay, we have to tweak everything anyhow. We have to change the amount of content that is on pages. Usually we had very, very big structures where we had to click through to get to the detail pages. Now we are ending up with longer pages that consists of all the important information in one place. So we have to at least touch everything, then we don't need an automation. Do you have seen changes there?
Yeah, I think as much as like the tool set and sort of, the time, like over time, a lot of it depends on kind of how old and outdated your current intranet is, right?
Yeah, you don't want to have the Christmas greetings from 2009.
And the story, which was from about 3 years ago, we were working with a Fortune 500 insurance company, and their intranet was on .NET Nuke, which was like, it's like a free version for Microsoft that doesn't exist. Now, obviously, they're like, can you automate stuff? We're like, no, it's like free hand-coded HTML that is not good. It's not tagged. Like, we don't want to automate it. You actually want to destroy it and, run away screaming. But, I think when you get to this where you have organizations that I think, and obviously, I think today's discussions are talking a lot about is like where client communication and clarity and hybrid workforces, and this is all so much more important. Oftentimes people use this as a mechanism to say, yes, we can automate, the press releases. That's a great one. I don't think that really has changed, but it's like, well, actually, maybe we just need to automate pulling the URL because those press releases live somewhere else, and that's fine. And we don't actually need to duplicate them. So I think there's just a changeover in terms of, you have more tools at your disposal for automation, but I think people start to think a little bit more intelligently of what they really want to automate versus where they want to spend the time. Now you get into the practical matter of it, time, resource, human being power always comes into play. Oftentimes we, start to say, well, okay, well, what's the bare minimum of content you need migrated to launch? Is there a reason, if you're having your annual meeting and you're bringing people together, like that's the time you want to unveil it. It's like, okay, well, probably the press releases from, 1955 don't need to be migrated over right now, but eventually you may want to get them there so you have this new single shiny repository.
Yeah, definitely. So it's also something that is occurring often if I'm talking now to companies. They're usually coming, I want to at least automated take over all my news from the old intranet. I say, okay, you are facing now a 3-month project, probably. Why don't you just start to maintain your news in parallel? So if you create them in your old intranet anyhow, you can also do the same job in your new one. Then you have a backlog of 3-month-old news, which is probably enough for most of the employees. Why do you want to already pack your new intranet with old stuff if you just can create an archive, which is also searchable? Why overcomplicate things?
Definitely keeping it simple sounds like one of the tasks. I think from our discussions before, we've also talked about the different ways to organize some of the new content. And you talked about it a little bit, Michael, where you touched on, can we go through each PDF? But is there sort of your recommended path as you're sort of clustering those new pieces out? What is that thought process that you would walk through in order to migrate that content?
I think one of the things that's interesting, and Sebastian talked about like migrating a website, like a lot of the same logic. If you've done like a public facing website, you want to focus on the most, frequently used, the most important information and how you structure that. And then, the secondary and tertiary levels, maybe kind of, you have a little bit more flexibility on. And a lot of it can really be driven. And, this is something that, takes people a little bit more time to think about is, not all organizations are built the same way, right? Sometimes the internet lives in the marketing department. Sometimes it lives in corporate communications. Other times it lives in IT. And depending on where it is, you have different resources that are available. And also, you may have to get, different stakeholders or team leads from the different departments. And so oftentimes you have to structure the process a little bit different for each one of the groups too, right? HR and compliance, they're actually the easiest to work with. They have the most documents, they're the most organized. You say, hey, we need to have all the latest stuff. They're going to be on that because that's what their job is all the time. When you go and you start to talk to, people like, news and PR, we're like, okay, well, now there might be outside agencies that are involved. Like, what are we doing? If we're a publicly traded company, oh, well, can we automate like stock price and investor relations information? Because that's something that we know is important because we're giving people stock options and everything else. So, I think if I've lost total track of the question, but to go back, I think you really have to think about it in terms of your end game, right? What is your KPI for the success of the intranet, right? And it's not just about migrating old content, right? If that was the case, most intranets that got migrated would not be successful. When you wanted to start thinking about, well, what information that's new being added to the intranet becomes very interesting. I tell this story all the time. When we looked at analytics and we do, user research, and I think that's an important piece of talking to the end users of the internet, not just the stakeholders who own the content. When you talk to the end users, very different stuff bubbles up. So my favorite one, and this has happened on probably 10 or 12 intranets, one of the most common questions is what's for lunch at the cafeteria today? And if you have multiple buildings, like, oh, well, maybe I should go to the meeting over in this building because I can go to lunch there. And so little things like that, those little moments of delight, that we expect from other systems that we use, to have that pop up when I come in, like, welcome, Mike, today's lunch special is, the cod or whatever it is, those things can really make or break to say like, okay, now when that pops up and I also get the message from my CEO or, my department head, well, now I'm starting to say like, oh, this is active. It's updated in real time. A lot of thought has gone into it, which is going to make me as the employee, really kind of buy into it more and get more value out of it. And then you get that very helpful, like circular motion. People are going to the internet. So then, things will morph and they'll make requests to have more stuff there than they even thought about.
Yeah, I like this term spring cleaning in the beginning. And beside the cleaning aspect, you also have this chance of restructuring everything that it makes more sense. Because if we look on intranets that are 10 years old, they're typically always start page news about our company. Who is looking into about our company more than once? So this is something you can put directly at the end of the navigation, right before help. Help should be the last one, but about our company shouldn't be the third one in the navigation. It's these things, what is going to be there at lunchtime? Those are important for users. And this is something that we should put a special eye on during migrations. How can we change the whole user experience? What do we need to take over? What do we should create as kind of content which isn't existing in the old intranet? So it's kind of kill your darlings, but build up also new flowers in the intranet.
Definitely, for sure. Dwayne in the chat also mentioned what's for lunch. Absolutely. Their menus are the ones that get the most views for sure as well. So definitely an important topic for employees. I guess besides the menus, Michael, curious if you have seen a trend in the content besides menus that is expected of an employee every day. So, do you have a top 3 that you're always looking, that you're always seeing in some of these migration projects?
Oh, that was not in the prepared questions, Tracy. I don't know. One of the things that I think we are incorporating much more and much more robustly, and a lot of this is driven by technology, is really like employee lookup, right? And there's lots of different flavors of that. In some healthcare environments, we had a client of ours. They were losing a lot of business on referrals from their health network because their intranet didn't work. And if I was a general practitioner and I needed a chiropractor or I needed an orthopedic surgeon, we actually did an ethnographic study with them, and they were going out to Googling doctors that were out of network and then sending the referrals out of the healthcare network, right? So they literally were trying to serve their patients as best they could, but they literally were hurting the health system by not keeping it in-house and then keeping the records together. And so one of the things, that we've seen a lot of is at employee lookup by location, phone number, especially in a hybrid or remote model. Oftentimes like being able to say like, oh, how do I get them on Teams? Or how do I, what's their cell phone number? Or where are they located even is a common question that people now realize like, oh, are you in this office or that office? So that's one that I think has really become bigger. And also that instant connection, right? Where you can actually place a call, whether it's, via your stock phone or whatever it is, in real time, where you can connect or send a message and have those all integrated, I think is really important. The other piece too is I think third-party services, right? So think benefits or counseling, or Sebastian talked about medical care. So not necessarily provide those benefits, but a lot of times there's these online services where you can have like telehealth or these docs, and when you can incorporate those into the intranet, right? Again, when does an employee tend to look for this stuff? Well, if they need something and they're sick. So what are those needs? Like if you're spending money on these benefits, why not put those in the intranet and make them really easy to access? Whether it can be single sign-on or even just the redirect. Sometimes just having the links out and a little blurb about what the service is. I think we see a lot more of that because we're so focused on providing employees with the best possible benefits and services, and thinking about them holistically now, not just as like a time clock puncher, but actually if we can keep them happy and, we can try, we're paying for these services, so let's get the usage out of them. So I'd say, I don't know if that's probably only 2. I don't know about the third one. I'd have to think more on that one.
But I have a third one in addition to the ones you named. What I see as one of the most clicked and high valued content is all around people. So having overviews about who is joining the company, who's leaving the company. Some companies are very afraid to publish those things, but this is something that most of the people are looking for because they're curious about what is going on, who is going to join. Everything in terms of content, putting people in the spotlight, putting people in the focus is working really, really well. And this is something you should foresee, even if you don't migrate something like that, that you foresee this for the starting point to have something based on people.
Yeah, and I would extend that, whether it's org charts or departments or sort of peers and reporting lines, that's a big one. Again, a little bit of a hot topic. Oftentimes it's senior leadership. Do they want that? Will they be able to maintain it? That sort of maintenance practice of saying, like, making sure that it's up to date is really important. But the other piece of that too is people's photos. Right, we're such in the world where everyone has a headshot. I just spent like 20 minutes trying to update my headshot in some system because it was like an old one, and someone commented. I was like, oh, I didn't even know that showed up. But making sure you think about that from a migration standpoint. It's maybe even less of a migration standpoint if you have an older one, and it's actually a content creation process, right, where you either want people to source them themselves, and what's the process to collect them. But again, those little pieces of delight in an intranet, where when you pull someone's card up, it has all that information. You have the picture, like, oh, that was who that was in that meeting. When you're in these large distributed offices, it makes a lot of difference in terms of the usefulness and the utility of the intranet that you're producing.
Definitely. In our beginning conversation, you chatted a little bit about not only photos, but some of the writing style as well too. So how do you go about coaching through, this is a really great PDF, but we might need to finesse this a little bit, or maybe this news post has, or this policy needs a little bit of finessing as well too. What are some of the key components to that?
Yeah, and again, I think for too long, the intranet has been sort of a second-class citizen, and the same basic premises that we would talk about our brand with do not apply internally. So oftentimes, we work with customers to say, what is your brand voice? Because that should be how you talk to your employees as you talk to your customers, right? You want those to hopefully be, in sync with each other. But sometimes you may actually, and we've worked with some customers too, where you develop sort of a different internal persona, right? Where, maybe you want it to be more colloquial and you want it to be more friendly. You're trying to drive, that's your mission statements of, having a good team structure. So, oftentimes what we'll do is work with them to write sample content, and say, hey, let's have a content editor and a copywriter work with, someone from each division or each group who's be producing the content, and start to say, like, these are messages and this is the type of thing, you can do, and kind of really have that coaching session, right? It's that editorial, language that once you have it, it's pretty easy to stay in tune. I think long-term, you always have the challenge of staying on voice, but, especially for the most important pieces of content, I think you want to say, hey, there needs to be an overview process. It shouldn't just be one person writing this. We need to have an editor come in, even if it's just a peer or someone else in the group, and say, hey, well, that's not the right tone. That seems a little, top down or a little too colloquial, whatever it is. Because again, that consistency, those little things really come across, because all of your employees just consume so much content every day in their life, everywhere, that you want to make sure that when you're speaking on the intranet, that you do a good job of that, because you want it to echo, whatever the message is, and you don't want to detract from that, by having some off-brand weird comment, then whatever the message was gets lost, because that's all they're going to pick up on and be like, well, that doesn't sound like the approved message that, we just went to that training session on, like how to speak about the products and all that stuff.
Definitely, for sure. Sebastian, anything to add?
I do think this whole topic about how to enable folks to write good content, to prepare content correctly, is also something that we have seen a lot of changes. I remember back to the first intranet I was responsible for, which was the SharePoint 2013. We had 2 days of training for all the editors, and most of the stuff was technical things. And with nowadays intranets, they are a lot easier. People are also more used to use such kind of systems. So we most definitely don't spend 2 days training them, but if we are spending 1 day, we are spending 1 hour or 1.5 hours on technical things, and we can use the rest of the time for those soft facts, how to write good content, how to prepare everything in the right way for the migration. And later on, this is also something that can be automated with things like automated messaging to new editors, that they get on a regular basis messages about, hey, please remember this needs to be inside of your page. This is the structure that we're using. So there are a lot of new possibilities making this task way easier than before.
Absolutely. Wonderful. This has been a fantastic conversation. One last question. We've sort of talked about it a little bit. It's been mentioned a few times, but we have this shiny new product that we've, completed for all of our employees. We've gone through all of the PDFs. We've done all of our writing styles. We are making sure that we have everything on brand and everything in the place that it needs to be for our employees. How do we make this exciting for them? How do we get them to understand that this is a change, but that change is really good? So I'm curious to know, Michael, you've talked about launch strategy a lot. How is that best completed as part of the migration?
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding like a broken record, again, it's, how would you go to market with a new product, right? And it's thinking about that rollout. And so, one of the things that we recommend is creating some buzz. So whether that's at like a town hall meeting or whatever you have in your corporate structure, showing some coming soon type slides where you start to say like, and you can, sometimes it's great, you show the old and the new, and you highlight things like the lunch menus will now be online, and the weather report, like, do you need an umbrella or whatever, those little things, you sort of show people that you're invested in this. The other piece too is if you've done user research and you've talked to users of the product, bringing them back in and showing them early versions and getting some evangelists kind of internally about how good this is going to be, I think is really helpful. And then also, I think Sebastian talked about like, okay, on day one, just, be starting to duplicate the news items and stuff like that, making sure that on day one, it's not just an empty shell where you just have like the executive photos and the people that, you already know, because then all of a sudden as an employee, you're like, well, this wasn't made for me. This was made, for the C-suite and their team. So I think a little bit of that prep work of, getting buy-in early, getting people to participate, and really starting to, whether you can roll it out lots of different ways, as it by department or location. I think some of those things to kind of build the momentum, that every launch is better. We've had clients where they actually do a whole launch and they make swag for it. And there's like t-shirts, and if they give it a good pithy name and they sort of get behind it, to try to say like, this is an investment in our people and our culture, and we're going to really invest in it. Right. And we're not just going to have this be another thing that you have to use. We want this to be something that you want to use and, make it a little bit more fun. We've also seen some sweepstakes and some raffles, anything that you would do for any other internal messaging that you want to build buzz for. The intranet should get that, because, you only do it every 3-5 years, maybe sometimes 10. So make it a big thing when you do it, because you want to get the most bang for your buck out of it.
Definitely. Everyone loves a really good coffee mug and a really good t-shirt too, right? Especially if they're cozy and comfy. Sebastian, anything from your side to think about?
I love this, creating a buzz thing, creating curiosity amongst the employees. So there are hundreds of ways how to do such a launch strategy, and we could fill another session just about how cool companies have done this in the past. But I do think one element is definitely also, if you're preparing a great intranet, if you have a user-focused intranet instead of an organizational-focused intranet, if you're making things easier, getting away from those big, chunky 10,000 pages blockers that people were used to, if they open the intranet and they say, hey, this is cool, this looks great, this is easy to navigate, then you're also having a way easier job in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. This has been a lovely fireside chat.